It's a beautiful day here in Johannesburg in South Africa, and we are now just 1 week away from the 26th Conference of the Parties, the big United Nations Climate Change Negotiations meeting that is to take place in Glasgow in Scotland in the first 2 weeks of November. This meeting is of course a critical one for the world and also for Africans and Southern Africans, because it is effectively the last chance that humanity has to prevent the most catastrophic impacts of climate change from occurring. Let me take us one step back and talk about another big highlight that occurred in early August this year, when the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released its 6th assessment report on climate change, specifically the Working Group 1 report that deals with the physical science base of climate change. This report is a key impact to the United Nations Climate Change Negotiations meeting coming up in November. Now, the report made a number of startling assessments. Shortly after its release, it was called the Code Red for Humanity by the United Nations Secretary General. And why is the report seen in this light? Well, firstly, it assessed that the level of global warming is now about 1.1 degrees Celsius. Now, that is important because it means we are now very, very close towards exceeding the so-called dangerous thresholds of global warming, namely 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius of global warming. Secondly, the report found that it may actually now be too late to avoid the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold of global warming. That is because we've left the mitigation process. That is because we've delayed climate change action or climate mitigation for too long. Even if we do everything that we can right now and we set up through an international collaboration a so-called best effort mitigation, an effort where we cut greenhouse gas emissions by about 50% in just 10 years by the year 2030. And after that, we continue to cut emissions and we achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. Even if we can do that, the chances are more than 50% that we will still exceed the 1.5 degrees Celsius level of global warming. Now, there's also good news. If we do undertake this best effort mitigation, chances are excellent that we can restrict global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius. And if we can invent some new technologies known as carbon dioxide removal technologies, then even if we do exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming somewhere in the next 10 or 20 years, we may still be able to reduce global temperatures to a value below 1.5 degrees Celsius somewhere in the second half of the century. So as we are having this discussion today ahead of the 26th Conference of the Parties, the level of global warming is still in the hands of humanity, and we can still take those strong climate change actions that we do need to take. Why are these levels of 1.5 degrees Celsius and 2 degrees Celsius of global warming so important? Well, it's because they define so-called dangerous climate change or irreversible climate change. For a start, the IPCC report has pointed out that should the level of global warming rise to somewhere below 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius, we may well trigger the irreversible melting of the Greenland ice sheet and also the West Antarctic ice sheet. Now, that will commit future generations to about 12 meters of sea level rise. It will take millennia for those ice sheets to completely collapse and melt away. But remember that our generation will then be known as the generation that literally stole a part of Earth from future generations. The future planet will literally be smaller than today's planet should those levels of sea level rise materialize. Also, in our own lifetime, sustained global warming of 2 degrees Celsius means sea level rise in the order of a meter, somewhere towards the end of this century. Now, that will be enough to displace hundreds of millions of people from the low-lying coastal parts of the world still in this century. So reaching these levels of 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius of global warming, where aspects of climate change become irreversible, for example, sea level rise and ice sheet melting are irreversible aspects of climate change. To such critical points are referred to as global tipping points. I would also like to talk today about regional tipping points that may occur in the Southern African region. And there are 4 of these tipping points we are concerned about as climate scientists. The first refers to the more frequent occurrence of long-lasting droughts in Southern Africa. Droughts that last for 3 to 5 years have the potential to make our cities run out of water. To such droughts are now referred to as day zero droughts. And South Africans will of course know that from 2015 to 17, we came very close to such a day zero drought occurring in the city of Cape Town. Now, back in 2016, at the end of a big El Nino drought, I think too few South Africans know that we also came close to a day zero type drought in the Gauteng province, because the level of the Vaal Dam fell at the end of that drought to below 25%. Should it have fallen to below 20%, then because of water quality reasons and engineering reasons in terms of pumping that water uphill to, say, Johannesburg, the Gauteng water supply from the eastern mega dams would have been severely compromised. Now, under future global warming, the Southern African region also becomes warmer. It becomes warmer, in fact, at a rate almost twice the rate of global warming. And at the same time, the Southern African region is becoming dry. Now, that combination of a region that is already water stressed and then becomes drastically warmer with more evaporation, while it at the same time becomes systematically dry, of course means that the risk for drought and specifically day zero droughts occurring in the region will increase for as long as global warming continues. South Africans will know how catastrophic a Gauteng day zero drought may be. It is the province in which 16 million South Africans live. It is the industrial heartland of the country. And just the socio-economic impacts of such a drought will of course be absolutely devastating. Secondly, as the global climate warms, we will also more frequently face the risk of heat waves occurring in the Southern African region. Now, heat waves are of course life-threatening to all our people living in informal housing. If you don't have air conditioning and you don't have easy access to cool water, a heat wave, which means temperatures are oppressive for 3 to 5 days at an end or even longer, is literally a life-threatening event. Climate science is very clear. During the next 10 years, we will see unprecedented heat waves occurring in the Southern African region. Then thirdly, heat waves in combination of drought is of course also very harmful to agriculture in South Africa. And specifically, back in 2018, when the IPCC published another report on climate change impacts across the world, it pointed out that should the world warm by 3 degrees Celsius, that's globally, the regional temperature increase in the order of 6 degrees Celsius will mean that the maize crop, the staple food in Southern Africa, may collapse. So just try to imagine Botswana without any cattle, or try to think about South Africa's Northern Cape or Northwest Province or the Limpopo Province without any cattle. These are the risks we will increasingly face for as long as global warming continues. Finally, I'd like to talk about a completely different type of tipping point that may occur in our region, which is about tropical cyclones moving further to the south than ever before. Specifically, intense tropical cyclones, also known as Category 4 or Category 5 hurricanes. In a warmer world, it will become possible for these systems of that intensity to, for the very first time, move as far to the south as Maputo in Mozambique, or even Richards Bay in South Africa. So, if we think about all these vulnerabilities of the Southern African region to a warmer world, it is clear that South Africa and the larger Africa group in the upcoming climate change negotiations will have to stand as strong as they've ever stood in terms of negotiating strongly for support for Africa from the developed world in order to prepare for these increasing impacts of global warming on the African continent. For example, African countries will have to negotiate very strongly for substantial financial investment in climate change adaptation projects across the African continent. Secondly, African countries, of course, are entitled under the Paris Agreement for investments from the developed world and for cheap loans coming from the developed world in order to transition their economies away from the current large dependence on oil and coal towards economies fueled by renewable energy. There are substantial opportunities for African countries, including South Africa, for economic growth if global warming can be restrained, preferably to well below 2 degrees Celsius, so that we can avoid these most harmful impacts of climate change on economic growth in the Southern African region and more broadly in Africa. And of course, there are substantial opportunities for economic growth and job creation if we can attract significant investment under the Paris Agreement towards a new renewable energy sector in South Africa. That investment cannot, of course, only generate hundreds of thousands of jobs in the renewable energy sector itself, but also downstream into the economy, as the economy will hopefully start to grow because of these substantial investments. So as we move towards COP26, I would like to extend my wishes to the South African negotiations team. And on behalf of all South Africans, I hope that the climate change future we are heading towards will be one where humanity has made the right decisions, where we have constrained global warming to the largest extent we possibly can, and where we are very much aware about our increasing responsibilities to adapt to climate change and to fairly contribute to the climate change mitigation process.